A vital element in keeping the peace is our military establishment. Our arms must be mighty, ready for instant action, so that no potential aggressor may be tempted to risk his own destruction. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military security alone more than the net income of all United States corporations. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic process. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
Do you know how much a Patriot PAC-3 missile designed by Raytheon costs on average? $4 million. Do you know how much on average a scholarship costs? $5,000. So for the cost of only one Patriot missile that is launched to destroy a building in the Middle East that isn't even worth a tenth of the cost of that missile, you can pay for the scholarship of 800 children. Let that sink in. So what actually is the military-industrial complex? It is the relationship between a country's military and the defense industry. Defense contractor companies like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, KBR, and so forth. Those companies are the corporations that fuel the US military with weapons, bullets, Humvees, tanks, jet fighters, and so on. Those companies are paid by the US government, whom borrows that money from the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve prints that money, in the process devaluing the dollar. The government pays those companies to manufacture those goods for the military. USA at this moment has 750 military bases overseas. Those military bases need constant supply, maintenance, guard shifts, and they occasionally train, consuming fuel, bullets, missiles, artillery, and so forth. Needless to say, whenever there's a military conflict, a military coup, a civil war, the US government rushes to help one faction of their choosing. Usually that faction is the one that preaches a democracy and freedom. And sometimes Russia does the same with the other faction to keep alive their own military-industrial complex, albeit a smaller, scaled-down version of its American counterpart. Whenever there's a war, the military-industrial complex thrives, and not to burst your bubble, but ever since the end of World War II, the business has been doing real good. And nowadays, in 2024, business has been booming! Let's name, off the top of my head, what little wars or skirmishes US is involved at the time of recording this video. The Ukraine War, Israel-Palestine War, Israel-Lebanon War, the Syrian proxy war where Israel, Turkey, and USA armed the Syrian rebels, and the other side, the Assad government, armed by Russia and Iran. But they are called the terrorists. Remember, kids, if Israel or the United States supports a faction in a civil war, that faction is called the freedom fighters, the rebels, and the other side, those are the terrorists, the belligerents, the real bad guys. Let's talk a little more about NATO. NATO stands for North Atlantic Terrorist Organization. North Atlantic Treaty Organization, whom of course on its member boards are lapdogs for the military contractors like these two twinks who can't even bench press their own weight, Mark Rutte, whom he violently says arms firms need to produce more at lower prices. I think someone is too naive for their own good. Right, Four Eyes? And this effeminate cock whom says NATO is prepared to take on Russia 101. Meanwhile, Russia produces more military equipment in 3 months than all of Europe can in 1 year. Yeah, bro, I don't know in which universe you live, but it ain't this one. The military-industrial complex thrives in propaganda and in Hollywood propaganda. Movies like The Hurt Locker, American Sniper, every Tom Clancy novel or adaptation, every Call of Duty video game. The military-industrial complex is not just a blunt instrument for forging weapons of war, but also a subversive tool to be used in media such as films, video games, to fool the stupid masses to join the army, to fight terrorists on the behalf of the government and for the interests of oligarchs and the political class. Whenever US sees that a country becomes more sovereign, meaning they accept or elect a government that doesn't represent USA's interests, they bomb the shit out of them! Or in isolated cases, they infiltrate their CIA agents to do a fake coup on their behalf. Case in point, like they did in 2014 with the Maidan coup in Ukraine and the Color Revolution in Georgia. If that doesn't work, they fund terrorist organizations, or as they like to call them, freedom fighters. Just like during the 80s, when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, they financed the Mujahideen, where Osama bin Laden was a member of. Later, when Osama bin Laden went off the script, he became USA's public enemy #1. I'll do a video in the future where I will talk about CIA and what governments they toppled and expose some of CIA's secret assets. Believe that. Spoiler alert, Saddam Hussein was a CIA asset. The US propaganda always uses words like democracy, freedom, liberty, self-governance to justify a military operation in a foreign country, disregarding that country's tradition, culture, religion, or even what the people of that particular country actually want. Believing themselves as superior and believing that their values are superior and should be spread throughout the world. Democracy, self-governance. How are we gonna spread those values and spread American peace throughout the world? By bombing the shit out of them! Ah yes, the arsenal of democracy. Well, in reality, it was never about political ideology. That was just a pretense, a scapegoat to justify a war for the stupid masses. In reality, is only about resources and money. That's it! Why do you think the Middle East is in constant war ever since 1948, since the inception of a fake country? Because Saudi Arabia has the world's largest oil reserves, besides Venezuela. This is why they need to fuel the military-industrial complex, to keep afloat their fake-invented country, to maintain a stable relationship with USA and bully every single country that isn't falling in line with USA's interests. And of course, countries like Iraq, Iran, Syria, Qatar, United Arab Emirates and Kuwait, they all have massive oil reserves. This is only one reason why at this moment in late 2024, you see the Middle East blowing up with proxy wars left and right between Israel and Palestine, Israel and Lebanon, Israel and Syria. The terrorists of yesterday, like ISIS, became overnight US allies. And now they are labeled as rebels or freedom fighters. And the other side, the Assad government, they are evil incarnate. They are the terrorists. Not us though. We are the good guys. You see why those words mean nothing nowadays? And you know that the military-industrial complex is the biggest money laundering operation of all time. Everything is super overpriced. Just look at the price of this single bolt. $45 for a single goddamn bolt. Why? Or the spare parts of an F-35. Why would you pay $25 billion for spare parts when that flying scrap of metal is gonna get blown to smithereens anyway? Oh, I get it. You wanna launder that money and put it in your pocket, don't you? And also, mega corporations like Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon have total monopoly on military equipment, and of course they can afford to overprice their products since nobody else is doing it. You see why protectionism in the market is necessary, you stupid libertarians? You know, the military-industrial complex isn't just the Pentagon and the people that are producing those weapons. It is also the service sector. Things that the troops used to do, like peeling potatoes, doing laundry, making food for the troops. Nowadays, the troops are served with everything from MRE, short for meals ready to eat, made by the best chefs in the world, also highly overpriced. Don't get me wrong, I had some for myself. They're fantastic, but why are they so overpriced? My mom can cook the same food at a fraction of that price and make it 10 times more delicious. Do you see why USA has by far the biggest defense budget out of all those countries in the world? It is not because they have the biggest army and the best army in the world, not by a long shot. Russia and China dwarf the US Army in size, yet they have a fraction of its budget. Why? Because USA launders that money, and the ones that pass those military contracts launder that money, and the weapons manufacturers massively inflate those prices of weapons, missiles, services. Why? Because they can, and because no one else is doing it besides them, creating a monopoly on weapons. And now I want to talk about a figure that deserves its own video. A figure that I personally would be the happiest person on earth if I could just beat him to a fucking pulp with my bare hands. And that person is none other than Dick Cheney, the vice president under George W. Bush. The FBI made a report that took 2.5 years to make, and they spent $600,000 and 33 people, including investigative journalists, looking at private military companies who outsourced war all over the world, not just in USA. And they noticed that in 1992, there was a contract of $9 million to a company named KBR, Kellogg Brown and Root, to study the idea should the Pentagon start using the private sector to do some of the support type functions like food service, latrine duty, even some military things as well. At that time, the Secretary of Defense was none other than Dick Cheney himself, and gives the contract to Kellogg Brown and Root. the next 10 years, they get 700 contracts to do just that. This company brought Dick Cheney to make sure he opens the doors for them in Washington and other capitals around the world. He went from under $1 million net worth to $70 million in just 5 years. USA just elected a private military contractor as its vice president. This is USA we are talking about, not Russia, not Congo, not Sudan, not Algeria. USA! You know, I have a prediction for the future. I think that the future won't be a World War III and the total nuclear Armageddon like some fearmongers would like to instill fear into the public. No, I think that the future World War III will be a huge, never-ending stream of small proxy wars all over the world here and there, between USA and its puppets like Europe versus Russia, China, Iran, Pakistan, and so on and so forth. Basically, like Metal Gear Solid, a future where the war economy, it's the global economy, and it's free game for anyone with money to have its own private army. I know, it sounds really stupid and goes on borderline parody, but hey, the world is a huge clown show anyway! War is the most profitable industry in the world. Why the US government would ever want to change that, since their own culture preaches values like money, profit, self-indulgence, and the pursuit of its own desires. Those are embedded into their own culture. I did a whole video about this also. Just like Iraq, USA will go to war on a false pretense with a whole region of the world just to sell some weapons via the military-industrial complex. This is how evil and how much they lack any empathy for human life. Did you know that during the 6 months period of the Iraq War, 50 precision airstrikes were conducted against the Iraqi leadership? None of them hit its intended target. Let that sink in. Those forever wars waged by the shadow of the military-industrial complex are waged on the taxpayers, on the working class, to suck out all of their taxes from their hard-earned money, put them in the pockets of those mega corporations to manufacture missiles to bomb women and children in poor countries. And just like today in 2024, the Trump administration appointed war hawks like Sebastian Gorka, Marco Rubio, Pete Hegseth, Pam Bondi, and Kristi Noem. There is no difference between a Democrat administration or a Republican administration. Both are warmongers, only one wants you to die in Ukraine and the other wants you to die in the Middle East. Pick your poison, I guess. I also made a video about this specific topic. The military-industrial complex of USA is a bayonet, and USA is the ultimate imperialist power in the world. And I ask you this: what gives USA the right to police the whole world? Is it just because they can? Or is it just because they have the military might and power? Also, what gives NATO the right to provoke non-friendly countries like Russia to spark global conflicts? And now, come on, let's face it, NATO is just an extension of USA, since USA finances more than 80% of its budget. USA has been policing the world ever since the end of World War II. During the Cold War, they had a 20-year war in Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and Thailand, where they committed the worst atrocities known to mankind. Check out this video I made on this specific topic. And also staged coups in Iran, Congo, Chile, Argentina, and also bombed Lebanon, occupied for 20 years the East Timor, and also, ever since the end of the Cold War and the fall of the Soviet Union, USA has been bombing and waging war on other countries like Iraq, 20 years in Afghanistan, Syria, Yemen, Sudan, Lebanon. And also I should mention that they bombed my own brothers in Serbia. Yeah, what a force for good, what a force for democracy and self-governance. Such pure knights in shining armor. And they have the audacity to lecture Russia or China on diplomacy or democracy. The epitome of hypocrisy is the US government and the arsenal of democracy, aka the military-industrial complex. General Dwight D. Eisenhower was, without a doubt, one of the best presidents in US history for his accomplishments in his administration, like I said in this video right here, but more so for his ominous warnings about the priorities that are set by mega corporations in conjunction with the military-industrial complex that are not only influencing foreign relations and foreign policy for USA, but directly control them. His warnings must have fallen on deaf ears, because every single thing that he warned us about became true. Also, another president that warned about foreign entanglements was none other than George Washington himself. In my opinion, the best president USA ever had, and a man hundreds of years ahead of his time. His warnings also must have fallen on deaf ears. My only gripe with him is that he was a Freemason. Hey, nobody's perfect. I urge you, watch the following documentaries that I'm about to recommend to you. The first one, and the most important, is Why We Fight from 2005. The second one is Superpower, also from 2005. The third, Standing Army from 2010. The fourth is Taxi from the Other Side from 2007. The fifth, Terror Storm from 2006, and the final is The Fourth World War from 2004. Those are eye-opening, to say the least, and it confirms everything I preach on this channel, and that is the neoliberal and the neoconservative establishment, with the help of the media, is not here to help you, is not here to inform you, certainly is not here to protect you. Its purpose is to rule over you, to squeeze from you every last penny you have, to subvert you, to brainwash you, and to make you their slave forever. If you value my work, why don't you check out this video where I have a 15-minute mental breakdown explaining why I hate bureaucracy? Or would you like a more fun, light-hearted video in which I roast every single country in the world? The choice is yours. Man, I must have recommended over 7 videos of my own in this single video. This is starting to look like a huge commercial for my own channel.
Subscribe, you silly Billy!